June asked a question at the close of the month of the series that I have not been able to stop thinking about. And if you do not know what I'm talking about, go back and watch the Onward Still series. And trust me, you probably won't be able to stop thinking about it either. We named the systems, we confronted the external architecture of oppression. We said not one hoof stays behind. We talked about the internal freedom, external liberation, and why you need both simultaneously. And then we sat with the most, I think, at least one of the most honest image in the entire Exodus narrative. The Hebrews were delivered from Egypt, but Egypt was not yet out of them. 3 days after the Red Sea, 3 days after one of the most dramatic supernatural liberations in the history of Scripture, they were grumbling and complaining, already longing for Egypt. The leeks, onions, garlic, melons, cucumbers, and the fish. The familiarity of the place that had bound them for generations. Their bodies, their physical bodies were free, but their minds, their emotions, their mentalities, Egypt was still operating inside of them. And the question this series is going to live are these. What did the system build inside us? What does it actually take to get that system out? So, welcome to July. Welcome to Dismantling the Oppressed Mind toward mental liberation. Because the journey does continue. I am SSQJ, a devoted Black woman who loves Jesus for real. And this month, this series, we go inside. But let's pause right here. If you have not already, like, share, and subscribe. Like, seriously, what you waiting on? It's a time over here. It's a time. We have a time over here. All right, let's resume. But before we go anywhere further, I need to establish 3 distinctions that are going to be foundational for everything we cover during this series, because we are going to use 3 words that often get treated interchangeably, and they are not the same. The difference between them is the difference between a surface conversation and a real one, where we dig deeper. What are these 3 words? What you saying, Susan SSQJ? What these 3 words are? You got the mind, the mindset, and the mentality. The mind is the faculty itself, the God-given instrument of thought, consciousness, reasoning, and perception. That is what God designed and what God declared good. The mind is the what. It's the thing itself. It is extraordinary. The human mind at its fullest capacity, the creative, reasoning, discerning, and worshiping mind that reflects the image of the God who thinks and creates and orders and loves, is one of the most magnificent things in all creation. Now, the mindset is the collection of beliefs attitudes, and assumptions that shape how the mind consistently operates. The mindset is the lens the mind looks through. And here is the critical thing about the mindset: it is learned, it is conditioned, it is formed over time through experience, environment, and the message a person receives about who they are and what the world is, which means it can be unlearned. What was installed can be uninstalled. What was conditioned can be reconditioned or unconditioned. The mindset is the how the mind has been trained to function. Now, thirdly, we got the mentality. And this is the deepest layer. It is the embedded, often generational transmitted way of thinking that operates almost automatically below the surface, below the level of conscious decision. Mentality is less individual and more collective. It is what a community absorbs over generations without always realizing it is being absorbed. The reality, the survival mentality, the scarcity mentality, the mentality that says do not reach too high because the fall was will be way too hard. The mentality that says that has been shaped not just by personal experience, but by the accumulated weight of everything that the community has carried across time. The mentality is the death. Okay? So, brief recap. The mind is the faculty itself. The mindset is the how, and the mentality is the death. Okay? And here is how liberation works in relation to all three. You identify the mentality, the deepest layer, the one that operates automatically. You dismantle the mindset, the conditioned lens that the mentality produced, and you restore the mind back to its God's given capacity, renewed according to Romans 12:2, free to think from identity rather than injury. Ooh, that's good to me. Free to think from identity, your God-given identity, I got it, rather than from injury. That's good to me, but I can't do it up there. That is the work of July. That is the work of this series. And it begins now. Okay, I want to introduce a framework that I think gives language to something that the Black community has felt and experienced for generations, but has not always had the clinical and historical vocabulary to name. Dr. Joy DeGruy is a researcher, educator, and author who spends years studying the multi-generational impact of slavery, racism, and oppression on the psychological and behavior patterns of African Americans. Her work, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, published in 2005, argues that the centuries of chattel slavery in America, followed by the ongoing trauma of systematic racism, Jim Crow, segregation, and the continuous violence of anti-Black systems, produced a specific set of psychological and behavioral adaptations in Black people that have been passed down through generations. This is not a diagnosis of weakness now. Don't get me wrong. This is a documentation of adaptive survival. The behaviors and thought patterns that Dr. DeGruy identifies were not failures of character per se. They were intelligent responses to impossible conditions. They were what it took. They were what it took to survive. The problem is, though, not that they existed. The problem is that they have outlasted the conditions that produce them and continue to operate in a context where there are no longer survival tools, but they are limitations. Some of what Dr. Joy DeGruy identifies includes vacant esteem, which is a chronic sense of low self-worth that manifests as a need for external validation. Ever-present anger, a largely unconscious rage at the injustice of the historical and ongoing experience of racism that can turn inward or express in destructive ways within the community. Racist socialization, the internalization of the oppressor's belief system about Black inferiority, which then gets applied within the community itself. And I want to be clear about something here. Post-traumatic slave syndrome does not mean every Black person is broken. It means every Black person is operating in the aftermath of something that was designed to break them. And the residue of that design is real, documented, and requires intentional, informed, spirit-led work to address. That, beloveds, is not victimhood. That is an honest diagnosis. And you can, metaphorically, internet can misconstrue some things. Let's make it that. And you cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. Now, I want to connect this to something that happened in the wilderness that I think most of us have read right past. In Numbers chapter 11, verse 5, the Israelites says, we remember the fish we ate in Egypt, that cost us nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there is nothing at all but this manna. Trying to contain my excitement, my inside remarks, but really though, they are romanticizing Egypt. They are remembering the food and editing out the change. They are longing for the place of their bondage, because at least the bondage, they knew what to expect. Sound like somebody got some selective memory amnesia or something, but we ain't gonna judge, because we found it the same thing. Freedom was unfamiliar, and unfamiliar felt unsafe. I'm gonna say that one more time. Freedom was unfamiliar, and unfamiliar felt unsafe. And the mind, the conditioned, survival-oriented, Egypt-formed mind, reached back for what it knew. I told you we can't judge, because we can't judge too quickly, because it gonna hit home. Psychological. how to pronounce this word. My mouth just got twisted. Psychologists have a name for the phenomenon of developing positive feelings toward a captor or a place of captivity. What do you call it? Call it Stockholm Syndrome. Named after a 1973 bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden, where hostages developed emotional bonds with their captors during a 6-day siege. The psychology is this: when a person is in a situation of total powerlessness and dependence, the mind can form in attachment to the source of their powerlessness as a survival mechanism. The mind, if I can see my captor as good as providing for me as someone I have a relationship with, my situation becomes psychologically survivable. Whew. And Israel had been in Egypt for generations. Egypt was not just a place of bondage. It was home. It was the only home most of them had ever known. The fish was real. The vegetables were real. And the mind that had been formed inside that system, even after the Red Sea, even after the manna, even after the presence of supernatural provision provided by the one true living God himself, that mind reached back still for the familiar. But, beloveds, like I said, we can't judge. And I wouldn't even say that this is a weakness. That this is weakness. Weakness. Because what can you say? That is what bondage does to the mind over time. Yes, it does. It makes the cage feel like safety. I ain't got time for that metaphor. You know. It makes freedom feels like danger. And until the mind is intentionally deliberate and thoroughly renewed, it will keep reaching back for what it knows, even when what it knows was killing it. Does any of that sound familiar? It should. Not in, it might, I know it sounds familiar to me, I can't speak for nobody else, that not in the wilderness of Sinai, but in 2026, come on. Let's bring some relevance to this. And the ways we sometimes reach back for patterns and systems and relationships that we know are not good for us. Because at least they are familiar. In the ways the community sometimes fights hardest against the very changes that will liberate it. And the ways progress gets sabotaged from within. That is Egypt still operating. That is the mind that did not leave when nobody did. What's that song? Ooh. I ain't got time. I said I was going to make these videos shorter, so I ain't got time. In June, we start our last series called Onward Still. We talked about the 4 eyes of oppression: the ideological, the institutional, and the interpersonal, and the internalized. And I said that I was coming back for the internalized oppression. And here we are. Internalized oppression is what happens when the people who have been oppressed begin to absorb, believe, and enforce the oppressor's narrative about themselves. It is when the ideology that was constructed outside gets taken inside. When the hierarchy that was imposed externally gets reproduced internally. When the community starts doing the work of oppression on itself, policing each other's successes. Okay, tone it down, Susan. I'm gonna try to keep a tone demeanor. Reinforcing each other's limitations, applying the measuring stick of the oppressor to each other's worth and potential. And here is what makes internalized oppression so durable and so difficult to dismantle. It does not feel like oppression when you are inside it. It feels like realism. It feels like realism. It feels like wisdom. It feels like protecting yourself or protecting the community from disappointment, from overreach, from the pain of trying and failing. The mentality that says, do not reach too big, do not dream too big, do not trust too freely. That mentality does not announce itself as internalized oppression. It announces itself as common sense. And that is exactly why it requires dismantling, not critiquing, not managing, but dismantling, brick by brick, piece by piece, with intention and understanding, so it can no longer function as designed. All right, so that is what this series assignment is all about. So stay tuned. So, subscribe, turn on that notification bell, because, baby, the journey continues. We almost through, y'all. We getting shorter. Your week 1 reflection prompt is, where do you see the mentality of Egypt still operating in your own thinking? The reaching back for the familiar even when the familiar was limiting, the self-doubt dressed up as realism, the internalized standard that was never God's. Never name it specifically, because you cannot dismantle what you have not yet acknowledged. All right. We have named the frameworks today. Post-traumatic slave syndrome, stock syndrome, the internalized I, the distinction between the mind, the mindset, and the mentality. And we have connected them honestly to the Exodus narrative and to the present experience of the Black community. Next week, we go one level deeper. We are going to name the specific mindset that internalized oppression produces. Not in general terms, but specifically. What does a scarcity mindset look like in 2026? What does distrust look like? What does survival mode look like when survival is no longer the actual condition, but the mind has not gotten the message yet? We are going to name each one, and we are going to connect each one back to the manna that Israel did not trust, and the water they doubted, and the God they kept, and the God that they kept forgetting, even in the midst of provision. The chains inside are real, and they have names. We will name them next week. Hey, don't forget, like, subscribe, share with someone who needs to hear this. Hey, and let's do this dismantling work together. And this has been another SSQJ Chronicle. SSQJ Chronicle.